Okay. Hi, everyone. I think I'm live. Um, so, good afternoon. My name is Jillene Joseph. I'm the executive director of the Native Wellness Institute, and I am the presenter today on the Native Wellness Power Hour. So, thanks for tuning in. I'm just kind of taking care of some things here real quick before we get started. So this is the ending of our week 23 of the Native Wellness Power Hours. And on Monday, we will start week 24 of our Power Hours. It's still just unbelievable that we've been doing it for this long. So we have over 100 and I think around 150 or so Power Hours that we have completed and that you can find on our Facebook page. We also put them on our YouTube channel. So there's all kinds of things, workshops and cooking shows and poetry and comedy and all kinds of great stuff. So we encourage you to go back and watch them or even rewatch them as well. So I'm just trying to share this. We just encourage you to share it too so other people can tune in as well. Today's topic, I'm going to be talking about my thoughts on parenting, and this is actually a part two. So, like I said, my name is Jillene Joseph, and I am an enrolled citizen of the Aani people. The federal government calls us Grovant from Fort Belknap, Montana. And I live here in Oregon with my family. And I am a mom and a grandma. I have five children. So I gave birth to four and I raised my nephew, who was actually my ex husband's sister's son. And, or my kid's auntie's son. And I raised him as if he was my own. And so I work for the Native Wellness Institute, and I'm one of the founders of the organization. And we're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. So we're super excited about that. And anyway, I'll just dig in and start. So a couple weeks ago, I started out with a part one, my thoughts on parenting part one. And I talked about all kinds of things. And I talked about how parenting really starts before you become a parent and figuring out like who you want to who you want to have babies with, how you want to get those babies, what kind of parent do you want to be, really figuring out where did you learn to parent and where did they learn to parent and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of reviewed all that stuff last time, and I'll talk a little bit more about that stuff this time. And then as I went through the power hour, I realized like I didn't even get through, I only got through like half of what I wanted to share. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm gonna do a part two. So that's what today is. It's the part two. So if you're just tuning in, thanks. This is our week 23 of our Native Wellness Power Hours. The Power Hours are the Native Wellness Institute's response to the pandemic. And we knew that an already traumatized people would be re-traumatized. And so we went into action right away to provide this online programming. So as we stayed home and stayed safe, that this would be the same time every day for an hour to provide wellness workshops and all different kinds of programming that were positive and uplifting. So this this is why we're doing it and how we're doing it. So we want to give a shout out to the Urban Indian Health Institute this week for their support and helping us to do our power hours. So I talked a little bit about last time and the different things that we talked about. And one of the things that I didn't get to was I wanted to just show you and share. Oh, let me do these first. I had all these little baby moccasins sitting here they've been sitting here for 2 weeks. I never moved them, but I wanted to share these little moccasins are, I made these for my firstborn, Shailene. And then all of my kids that came after wore these. They're little tiny newborn moccasins, and they also match the cradle board that that I made for them. So I'm sharing this because like this is a part of parenting when we take the time to like put our love into a gift for for our babies. And then here was another pair. This pair actually and this pair are matching. So when my first two sons got their for their naming ceremony, they had little matching moccasins and they had little matching vests that they wore for the naming ceremony. Here's another pair. The favorite part of these are the back because they've been well worn and well used. So I just wanted to share that. Um, you know, in the teachings when we make things for our children, whether it's beading or sewing or you know painting or weaving or whatever it is, like we're putting our love and our prayers and our good thoughts and our good intentions into those. And then they become family heirlooms and they become items that we can tell stories about. So in my home, in our where we eat, there's like a little shelf, and I have all these moccasins are all lined up on that shelf. And then they become stories that we pass down to our children. And then one day they'll pass those to their children if they choose to have children. So the stories behind those go along with the item as well, and they become like a family heirloom, something to pass down. So I want to share about that. And then the other thing I wanted to share about too and talk a little bit about is when our families experience divorce. So we know now in our country, sadly, like 50% of families end up in divorce. And that's for, you know, for many different reasons. And so when I got married, I never thought I would end up in a divorce. But I did. Like that's just how life turned, right? So um, I got divorced, but before the divorce, um, I wasn't like really worried about the divorce. So we separated, and I just took my time in healing myself and focused on my children. And I was in a situation where we weren't co-parenting or anything. I became a single parent overnight, and I didn't like put myself as a victim or you know oh poor me or anything like that. It just I made these decisions, and I was gonna live with it, right, and make it work to the best that I possibly could. And so that's what I did. And so I knew that divorce was trauma, and so I needed to minimize um, that impact on my children. And so I didn't, you know, make a big deal about it, or you know, I mean, of course it was a big deal, but I didn't like console myself with my children or you know anything like that. And I didn't even tell them like, oh, I'm divorcing your dad or anything like that. And so I just kept reaffirming and reinforcing the fact that you know their dad loved them, and he was going home to like to take care of himself. And so that was like the messaging. And then it was like a couple years later I decided you know to file for a divorce. And so one day I was in the kitchen and my boys were in the living room and they were playing the two middle boys, Traven and Tristan, and they were playing in the living room. And the younger brother, I heard him say, I wonder if mom will." Oh no, the older brother, Traven, said, "I wonder if mom will ever get remarried." And then his younger brother said, "What do you mean? Mom's already married." And then his the older brother said, "No, she's not." And the younger brother said, "Yes, she is." And they're like, "Well, who is she married to?" And then the younger brother's like, "Well, duh, she's married to dad." So I was in the kitchen laughing, and I thought, okay, as the parent, here's a teaching moment, right? So I go into the living room, and I'd have a conversation about divorce, right? And so and my kids were young, and when we separated. And so anyway, I had the conversation about divorce and what that was and what that meant, and reaffirmed, you know, that their dad loved them, and you know all of that. And so they were just like, "Oh, okay," you know. And so you know we carried on. But during that time, when we did separate, and when I you know I knew I was done and all of that, I had to make sure that I had a support system that was going to help to uplift my children, you know, in the absence of their father. And so it was especially looking at, you know, uncles and other male role models for them and things like that. And so that's what I did. And of course, my own family, my parents, and everybody that helped me to get through it. And then the other thing that I think is important, that I see a lot of, is when people relationships, whether they're married or not, but they have children, and then they split up for whatever reason, and it's the fighting and bad mouthing and blaming and all of that kind of stuff. And our children see that and they hear that and they feel that, and that's trauma. That's additional trauma on our children. So when we, I used to always say, like, you know my picker was off, right? And who I chose to have children with, and the relationship didn't last. It didn't work out, and it was because of trauma, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And so I didn't have the awareness then that I have now when I got into the relationship, right? I didn't fully understand trauma and everything that went along with that then, like I do now. That's why I'm going to talk a lot about trauma today, here in a little bit. But I knew that trauma would be, divorce would be trauma on them. And so I never badmouthed their dad or said anything bad or anything like that. I kept that to myself. And even still today, I do as well. So I just wanted to say that, um, because I think that's important for parents to hear. When you feel like saying something, like bite your tongue or say it to a confidant that's an adult that's going to keep it to themselves, because it trickles down to your children, and then they, in whatever age and stage that they're in, they have to try to process that and figure it out. So I wanted to mention that. So the other thing I wanted to spend a considerable amount of time on today, is that trauma piece. So trauma, like, literally trickles down into every aspect of our lives, like literally every aspect of our lives. And we can turn the TV on any day of the week, especially in the last several weeks, and we can see it play out as well. And so I really want to, like, just give my condolences to the loss that we're seeing, happening on the news, and the turmoil that's happening, and the racism that is showing up, and even that we can use as parenting moments to teach our children, regardless of their age, right? Part of our responsibility as parents is to help shape our children, right? And it starts at birth. It starts pre-birth, but it's to help shape our children so that they are positive, contributing members to society, right? It's teaching them about racism, and it's teaching them about their role as a human being, right? Their responsibilities as a human being. So the stuff that's happening on the TV, that we see on the TV, that's happening all across America, really all across the world, is opportunities that we can take to have these conversations, with our children. And I hope that you do. And there's a term that we use in our work called healthy risk taking. And what healthy risk taking means is, like, doing something that you normally don't do, doing something where you're stepping out of your comfort zone, um, doing something that's going to help your own growth. And so having a conversation with your children about race and racism is like a healthy risk. And so I just encourage you to have that conversation and talk to your children about what do they think and feel about what is going on, right? What is racism? How does it show up? And more importantly, how can we not contribute to that? So I just want to share that. So, back to the trauma piece. So the Native Wellness Institute, we are grateful to all of our mentors and the people who, from back in the 70s, started, naming things like historical trauma, that started giving us the language and the words to use to articulate our experience. And so we're grateful. I'm grateful to my mentors, all the people, lots and lots of people who started doing work around historical and intergenerational trauma. Um, and it's because of that early work and the work that has happened after that our organization even exists. We exist because of the lasting impacts of historical and intergenerational trauma. And just as importantly, we exist to help our people move forward from that because healing is the answer to trauma. And so I love to talk about trauma because you have to talk about healing when you talk about trauma. So it is so it is so a part of parenting. Trauma is so a part of parenting. It's so, like I said earlier, it's just a part of everything. So we have some tools that we use in our work that helps people better understand trauma and helps people to connect the dots from trauma to behavior. So why I want to talk about trauma so much in parenting today is because if we don't recognize our behaviors related to trauma, it's going to continue to come out as a parent and might be even amplified. And if we don't heal our trauma, we're going to pass it on to our children. So this is important. And so it's kind of like this is the third time I've used this example this week on different Zoom meetings. I have like this little tickle in my throat today. But anyway, um, if this bag represented um, or the stuff inside the bag represented like all of our unresolved stuff, like all the unhealed stuff, all of our baggage. And we even hear that term, right? Like, oh, they have a lot of baggage or they have a lot of issues, as an example. So if this bag represented that, we can think about all the all the stuff, all the bags that we carry around. And when we see people, some of us have, bags on this side, and we have another one that we're packing around on this side. We might be dragging chunk loads, full of our stuff. And oftentimes what happens is all of the stuff that we're carrying around in this bag. Okay, so examples might be anger or rage or guilt or shame or unresolved grief or abandonment issues or all kinds of pain from all kinds of stuff. Okay. Um, we carry that around, and what happens, especially in relationships, is we're going to attract to someone who's carrying around probably just as much baggage as we are or more, right? So it's like that like-minded and like-hearted are going to find each other, and then they're going to, fall in love, and they're going to have this glorious life, and then they're going to start having kids, and then all of this is going to get, mixed in the relationship and in the parenting, and you know it's going to come out in different ways. So so healing then is about wanting to do something with all of our baggage. Healing then is about wanting to let go of some of that stuff so that we feel better, so that we feel lighter. And so we have to do some work, we have to take action in order for that to happen. Okay. So we might listen to a power hour, we might read a book, we might talk to a friend, we might go online and look at some resources or whatever to realize like, oh man, I have some things to work on. And then we may open up our bag and find something in here, right? Some unresolved grief, maybe from when, our grandmother passed away 20, 30, 40 years ago. Or we might pull out some anger. We've been holding on to somebody since 8th grade. Or we might pull out some shame because maybe something happened to us when we were little that we had no control over, but we're still carrying shame over that. All these things that we hold on to for whatever reasons, we can find ways to let that go. And we do that through healing. So we let go in many different ways, right? Maybe you're just going to decide in your head and you're going to write something down on a piece of paper, then you're going to burn that piece of paper. Or maybe you're going to go to therapy and you're going to talk to a therapist. Or maybe you're going to go talk to a pastor in your church. Or maybe you're going to go talk to a trusted elder or a mentor, like to help let that go. Maybe you're going to write somebody a letter of forgiveness, and maybe that person's not even alive anymore. So there's all different ways that we can heal. Maybe you're going to go take a run, and with every step you're just going to like let it go, let it go, let it go. So you're going to let this go. And then your bag might actually feel a little bit lighter, and you're just like, wow, maybe you're smiling more. Maybe you can take a deep breath now, right? And then you're going to look in there and like, well, what else am I holding on to? What else do I have in here, and what can I do about that? So you're gonna keep letting go and keep letting go until finally maybe you can downsize into a smaller bag, and this becomes much more manageable, right? This becomes much more lighter. You can actually like rotate your shoulders, and pretty soon you're smiling, and pretty soon you're like your mind is like more creative, and you can put your energy into things like this. You can put your energy into coming up with solutions to challenges, and you're contributing more at work, and etc., right? So when we let go of things, then we have to fill it back up with good things, right? Just like as a parent, we want to fill our children up with good things, not with traumatic experiences. So when we fill ourselves up with good things, then it takes the place of where that other stuff used to sit, okay? So we heal in many different ways. What works for me may not resonate or work with you, and that's fine. It doesn't mean that I'm right and you're wrong. It just means that we do things differently, right? I've tried things from a long time ago that I don't do now. And one of the things that I continually try to do and work on is to experience different ways of healing. So like in the last several years, I've tried float float therapy. So it's where you go into those a big tank of water. It's like a foot deep, and it has like 500 pounds of Epsom salt in it. And you go in there, no music, no lights, nothing. It's like sensory deprivation, and you lay in there for like an hour or an hour and a half. So that's been, I haven't done it since we're in this pandemic and stuff, but several years ago I tried that, and that was for my healing and well-being. So trying different things. So if our children have already experienced trauma, then they need opportunities for healing too. So you got to think about what will resonate with them, and you have to think about their age, right? Like with my children with divorce, I didn't say anything right away about divorce because of their age, right? And I knew that they wouldn't understand, and so I had to wait for a time that they could understand, and then I explained it to them, right? I didn't want to burden them with adult issues. So that's the other thing to be mindful of with parenting, is not to burden our children with our stuff, whether it's finances or relationship issues or what have you. So I talked about historical and intergenerational trauma is why we exist as an organization. And more importantly, we exist because of to help our people to heal, to move forward. And so there's lots of tools that we use in our work to help us to do that. And so I'm going to share a list. I know you can't see it, but I'm going to read it. So way back, many, well, let's see, 20 some years ago, I think, Kaiser Permanente, which is a healthcare agency, mainly out in the West. This particular office that did this was in California, but they did a study on adverse childhood experiences. And what they found was that people that experience childhood trauma, like it impacts their physical, mental, and emotional well being. And this research was really about preventative measures, to help our whole healthcare system. Um, anyway, they came up with a 10-question questionnaire to help us assess our own childhood trauma. And I'm going to read that questionnaire for you. And then later, let me make myself a note. I'll post this questionnaire on our Facebook page. I make myself a note to do that so I don't forget. Or you can always just email me and we can send it to you as well. So this question, so I just want like everybody to take a deep breath and get ready for it because it can be triggering for people. But speaking of that, a lot of people don't want to talk about trauma for all kinds of reasons. One, because some of us, if we grew up in trauma, whether it was poverty or violence or addiction, etc., etc., when we grow up in that, we learn three main unspoken rules. And those unspoken rules are don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. Don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. And those three little unspoken rules often keeps many of our people from healing because we spend our whole life like learning how not to do those things. So we need we need to
And
think
those,
about that for our children, right? Helping our children break through that. Um, so don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. And then when we want to heal, like what do we need to do? We need to talk, trust, and feel. So we need to learn how to break through those rules. So the ACEs study then um, doesn't include like a cultural understanding or background or a historical understanding or background. So it doesn't include like historical and intergenerational trauma. The other thing about trauma is that we need to, I feel strongly, that we need to change the way we view trauma. Like we give it all this power and it has all of this control over us and we fear it and we don't want to say the word or talk about it or anything like that. So we have to like be confident that we can move through it and overcome trauma and not make it this big scary thing, right? Like trauma is trauma. It's there and we've experienced it, but we can overcome because healing is the answer to trauma. And that's the beauty part. The healing part is the gift to ourselves, right? Healing is the gift to ourselves and the gift to our ancestors, and it's the gift to our children, and it's the gift to future generations. So it's the healing part that we have to focus on, right? So we don't trauma doesn't have to be this big scary thing, even though some big scary things have happened to us, right? We can move through it and we will be okay on the other side of it. So I just want to share that. So I say that because my vision for our people is that we will all have amazing parents. We will all be amazing parents, and that our grandchildren and future generations will be amazing parents. And what we instill in our children will be, our cultural values and will instill, positivity. And when they look back on their childhoods, they'll have positive memories that will help them be this positive, productive, proactive contributing member to society, right? And we have that in our history, and we can have that again. And we have it now. Like we have that now. There's examples that we have today. So I'm gonna it's 10 questions and I'm gonna share them with you. So these are adverse childhood experience questionnaire, and this is finding our ACE score. So basically, for every yes answer, it's 1 point. Okay, and there's 10 questions. All right, so here we go. While you were growing up, during your first 18 years of life, did a parent or other adult in the household often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? So if yes, that's 1 point. Two, did a parent or other adult in the household often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks where you were injured? Did an adult or person at least 5 years or older than you ever touch or fondle you or have you touch their body in a sexual way or try to or actually have oral, anal, or vaginal sex with you? Four, did you often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special? Or your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other. 5, did you often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, or had no one to protect you? Or your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you or take you to the doctor if you needed it? 6, were your parents ever separated or divorced? 7, was your mother or stepmother often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her? Sometimes or often kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard, or ever repeatedly hit over at least a few minutes or threatened with a gun or knife? 8, did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic or who used street drugs? 9, was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member attempt to take their own life? 10, did a household member go to prison? All right. So just take like a deep breath. Take a deep breath because I know some of those questions might be triggering. So those 10 questions can also be guides as we move through our parenting. So those things that I mentioned are examples of trauma, right? They're examples of trauma. And sometimes we don't always like see things as trauma because they're not traumatic to us, right? And I gave some examples last time and I'll say them again. So when we yell at our children, like we may not be like physically hitting them. We may view physical spanking or slapping or hitting as abuse or trauma, but we may not see yelling or belittling as trauma. And it is. Like yelling and belittling our children is trauma. So that's why we have to like literally spell these things out and share like what trauma is. Or another example that I see is when we let little children watch either like X-rated movies or porn, or we let little children watch like scary or horror films. That's trauma on children, and it's trauma on their brain because you think they don't have the capacity yet to discern between what's real and what's on TV. So be thinking about things like that. So our job as parents then is to minimize the trauma, is to minimize the trauma. And those questions that I just asked you, um, if you have like 4 or more, then what the research showed was that it impacts, like I said, our physical, mental, and emotional well-being. And we know it impacts our spiritual well-being as well. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be that way forever, because the other thing that the survey doesn't account for is like the healing work that we've done since then, or the proactive measures that we have in place today to like mitigate some of that, to deal with some of that stuff now, right? So the research doesn't account for that. So those 10 questions though are things that we can try to minimize for ourselves. I'm trying to watch some of the comments here. Can we get those questions again? Yes, I will say them again. I'll go through a little bit more quickly because it's already 12:36 and I want to get to another list. Adverse childhood experiences questionnaire. It's 10 questions. Um, and we think about when we were growing up during the first 18 years of our life, did a parent or other adult in our household often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? 2, did a parent or other adult in the household often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? 3, did an adult or person at least 5 years or older than you ever touch or fondle you, or have you touch their body in a sexual way, or try to or actually have oral, anal, or vaginal sex with you? 4, did you often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, or your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? 5, did you often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, or had no one to protect you, or your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you or take you to the doctor if you needed it? 6, were your parents ever separated or divorced? 7, was your mother or stepmother often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her? Or sometimes or often kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard? Or ever repeatedly hit over at least a few minutes, or threatened with a gun or knife? 8, did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic or who used street drugs? 9, was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member ever attempt or take their own life? 10, did a household member go to prison? So that's the 10 questions of the Adverse Childhood Experience, or ACEs as it's called for short, questionnaire. So the flip side to that, and I'll post this on our Facebook page as well, the ACEs questionnaire. This can be a guiding document for parents. Like, we want to minimize that trauma that was listed in the 10 questions, right? And we can see that the things that were listed in there are trauma. Okay, so again, because sometimes we have confusion on trauma. Now, um, the flip side to trauma is the healing piece, right? Because we know that healing is the answer to trauma. Healing is the answer to trauma. So where there has been trauma, healing is the answer. And so what we need to do is we need to flip about um, being scared to talk about trauma and the lasting effects, and like focus on the healing part. And so in my world, I talk about, like, my ears are always attuned to that word healing, and I listen to where it's being talked about or mentioned, and it's way more common now than it used to be in the past, right? Okay. um oh, somebody said, and did you spend 6 months in isolation because of a pandemic, or were you afraid to wear a mask or bullied by people who don't agree with you? Yeah, like, we're all experiencing all kinds of trauma in this pandemic. That's why we're doing these power hours, because we knew an already traumatized people would be re-traumatized in this pandemic. So the power hours are um, one of our responses to that. So the flip side to trauma is healing. And one of the things that our people are experts at is really um, grabbing our resiliency, and grabbing that resiliency to help us move forward in a good way. So I actually have a resiliency questionnaire that I want to share now, because that's our other job as parents, is to instill resiliency into our young people as well. So when I think of resiliency, I think of, like, I'm walking along and I step on a flower, and the flower kind of bends down, and then my foot goes off, and then the flower springs back, and that's how I think of trauma. I just, like, my have this black stuff on my hand. I have no idea where it came from. Anyway, that's how I, like, visualize resiliency. And so it's kind of like, when something or someone knocks us down, like, we have the ability to bounce back or to spring back. And again, like, our ancestors were, like, the experts of resiliency. That's why we're still here. So I have a resiliency questionnaire. And again, this can be a guiding force for us as parents, because we want to do these things, nurture these things, develop these things in our children. Okay, so I'm going to go through this questionnaire as well. Um, and this questionnaire, in 2006, this comes from the Southern Kentucky Healthy Start Program. No, not Kentucky, Southern Kennebec. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Healthy Start Program in Maine developed this questionnaire in response to the ACEs questionnaire. And there's lots of other people who have done research around resiliency. These particular questions are based on 40 years of resiliency research. That's where the questions come from that I'm going to share now. And I can share this on our Facebook page as well. Okay, question number 1. And the scale that you answer is definitely true, probably true, not sure, probably not true, definitely not true. So that's kind of how you answer these questions. Okay, 1. I believe that my mother loved me when I was little. I believe that my father loved me when I was little. When I was little, Other people helped my mother and father take care of me, and they seemed to love me. I've heard that when I was an infant, someone in my family enjoyed playing with me, and I enjoyed it too. When I was a child, there were relatives in my family who made me feel better if I was sad or worried. When I was a child, neighbors or my friends' parents seemed to like me. When I was a child, teachers, coaches, youth leaders, or ministers were there to help me. Someone in my family cared about how I was doing in school. My family, neighbors, and friends talked often about making our lives better. We had rules in our house and were expected to keep them. When I felt really bad, I could almost always find someone I trusted to talk to. As youth, people noticed that I was capable and could get things done. I was independent and a go getter. I believe that life is what you make it. Okay, so that was 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. 14 questions on resiliency. And again, that was based on 40 years of resiliency research. Okay, and we know that you know, my friend and colleague, Dr. Iris, heavy runner, Pretty Paint, she did her whole PhD thesis around resiliency. And her and I have been talking because I told her I want to make a native specific, resiliency questionnaire. And so hopefully that will be coming someday. Um, okay, somebody's putting some resources on here as well. So thank you, Rachel, for that. Um, Okay, so the resiliency questionnaire, the 14 questions that I just asked, those can also be guiding tools for us as parents and what we're trying to instill in our children. And I gave the example earlier about, the little moccasins and the stories that come behind these, right? That we tell our children, or even talking about when they were born, right? Their birth stories. When my children, every time they have their birthday, I tell their birth story, even though they've heard it all these times. Like I tell them their birth story because that's important, because I know even their adults, it's still contributing to their resiliency, right? And we can go back to the questionnaire. Um, a lot of the questions are about love. Did we feel loved? That's one of our most critical jobs as a parent, right? Is to love our children and to make them feel loved. Okay. So again, we go back to that trauma piece, because when we experience trauma, oftentimes there's like these main things that we can't say because of trauma, in part because we never heard them, right? And probably our parents never heard them either, because of boarding schools and how that was taken away and things like that. So our people then have a hard time saying, I love you. Our people have a hard time saying, I need help. And our people sometimes have a hard time saying, I'm sorry. And then related to that is, I forgive you. So we can think about that in the way we parent. Like, do we say those things? Do we model those things? And what I've heard from people all the time is like, well, my parents never said that, but I felt it. They showed me that they loved me in other ways, right? So just think about it. If you have children or even grandchildren, some of us are raising grandchildren, or some of us are raising other people's kids, but think about, do my do my children feel loved? Do they know that they're loved? Okay. So then we can go down that resiliency list, and we can take a look at the other things, right? People, I had people in my life that cared about me, right? Whether it was a neighbor, a family friend, another relative. And so even if we're not parents, maybe we're an auntie mom, or a uncle, dad, or we're a support person or something. Like, our role is important too, in helping a young person feel that they're cared for, right? So we can think about that. Having house rules, and we're expected to keep them. Okay, that's related to boundaries. And so what I see today is parents want their children to be their best friends, and so they don't want to do do anything or say anything that's going to get their children upset or mad at them or whatever. But they need that, and that is our role too, is to set those boundaries, right? So having those rules and then following them, like, that's important. And it sets up a framework that's going to help them later in their lives as well. Okay, having a trusted person to talk to. Okay, feeling capable that they could do things. So giving them responsibility that's appropriate for their age. Okay, so for example, you're not gonna expect a 3-year old to clear the table and wash the dishes and put them away, right? So what's age appropriate for a 3-year old to do? Teaching them to pick up and put away their toys, as an example, or, so it has to be appropriate, but helping them to feel capable that they can get things done. And this kind of also goes back to the term healthy risk taking that I talked about in the beginning, and why it's important to give our young children, or actually children of all ages, opportunities to take healthy risks. Because when we take healthy risks and we're successful at it, we feel capable, right? And that contributes to all kinds of things, our self esteem, our self worth, etc., etc. Um, I was independent and a go-getter, so giving our children the freedom to try things and to do things, and even if they're not successful, right? Like, I don't necessarily like that word failure, because we're still learning, right? Even when something isn't successful, like, we're still learning and growing from that. In fact, some of my most profound moments and teachings and learnings has been when something didn't turn out, right? So even thinking about that. Let's see, hearing stories, positive stories from our childhoods, people enjoying playing with us, etc., etc. That's why it's important to tell the birth stories, show the things that you made them, or remind them of things, and things like that. And then I believe that life is what you make it. So really thinking about that, do you believe that life is what you make it, and are you instilling that in your children? So when we come together in our trainings, like, we'll do that ACEs survey, and then we follow that up immediately with this resiliency one, because we want to have that balance there, and we want to show that healing is the answer to trauma. So sometimes we have people that take that resiliency test and they say, well, what if we scored horribly on that? What if we didn't have that when we were growing up? So we talk about that, and some of you listening in may find that as well, like, well, dang, I just didn't do well on either one of those, right? So that's that's the resiliency that's built when we're children. We can still build our resiliency regardless of what age we are. Even if you're, you know, 90 years old tuning in today, like, there's still things that we can do to build our resiliency. And somewhere along in your adulthood, your resiliency was built, right? So we can think about how was that built. You might be in positive, sound, grounded, healthy relationships today, and those relationships contribute to your resiliency today, right now, right? So we can think about that. How else has my resiliency been built as an adult? And so that's why I love the theme of being a lifelong learner, is that we can continue to build our own selves and to grow and to develop, and then that spills over into our personal lives, our professional lives, our relationships that we have with other people, is continually to build up our resiliency. And our resiliency is related, to our healing. It's related to our self-care and our self-preservation. It's related to our self-love. So all of that kind of stuff is related. Okay, I'm just trying to look at some of the other comments here. So we're just kind of scratching the surface here on that trauma piece. There's, like, so much to dig into. So it's also taking a look at when when we don't bring in that healing piece as well. um, our children are going to carry these experiences, the trauma experiences, into relationships. And when we do healthy relationships work with young people, sometimes we'll say sometimes our young people and our adults for that matter meet at like dysfunction junction, right? Because they're bringing all of this baggage to the relationship, and then they get into a relationship, and if healthy relationships haven't been modeled for you, and you don't have a lot of people in your life that have healthy relationships, so sometimes our what we think is a healthy relationship is actually an unhealthy relationship. Does that make sense? Because if that's the norm that we grow up in, that's what we think is normal. Okay? So if we come into an unhealthy relationship, I mean, if we come into a relationship with all of our stuff, that's going to contribute to an unhealthy relationship, right? And then oftentimes what happens is we get into this relationship and then we do start a family, and then already our children are being born into trauma. That's why like I'm talking about trauma so much today, because we need to like understand trauma and then understand the tools and the strategies to like move through that. So, and another power hour later, I'm going to go further into. We have another tool that we call the trauma web. That it's a handout for people to fill out to actually help them see how their life experience, their parents and grandparents' life experience contribute to the the behaviors that we display today, right? So it helps people connect the dots from the the intergenerational trauma to the current day behaviors that we display today. So I'm gonna do another power hour on that later down the road, and have people fill out that. So trauma, the way trauma is displayed, sometimes is like some of the behaviors are more socially acceptable than others, but sometimes the behavior is still driven by trauma, if that makes sense. So for example, when we talk about addiction, um, eating a gallon of ice cream is more socially acceptable than downing, a fifth of whiskey, as an example. Okay. um, a gambling addiction is more socially acceptable than a porn addiction, as an example. But they're both based in trauma. Does that make sense? So sometimes things are more, the way trauma plays out is more socially acceptable than others, but it's still based in that trauma, right? And the behaviors are still there. So anyway, again, looking at trauma and then looking at the tools and strategies to move through it, and realizing that your healing is not the job of your children, and you don't have to put that on your children, right? Regardless of their age, especially if they're younger. If you went through that survey and you're like, oh my goodness, like my children have experienced a lot of trauma, like you don't have to beat yourself up over that, right? You don't have to like pile more guilt onto your plate because of that. It's like, okay, my children have experienced trauma. What am I going to do now? And you may not be able to do anything to your trauma for your children until you do your own stuff first. So you may have to do your own healing work first, right? You may have to do that act of self-love for yourself first before you can nurture and develop and do that for your children, right? So in that way, like that's just an awesome gift to yourself, and the byproduct is an awesome gift for your children as well, or your grandchildren, or whoever you might be raising, or whoever you might be influencing or connected to. So again, we all heal in different ways. There's tons of resources and tools out there. There's tons of these power hours that have talked about different ways of healing, and we'll have more coming up that still talk about different ways of healing. This week on Monday, we had our friend and colleague Monique, who like talked about physical stretching and movement that we can do to help in our healing. We've had tons of power hours on other ways to heal. So the main thing is we actually have a t-shirt that says healing is a verb. It means like we have to be action oriented around our healing. We have to do something about that. And if our children see us do this, this is going to become a new norm for them. If our children hears us and sees us talking about this and doing this, like we're going to make it okay for them to do it too, right? So then that becomes a gift for them as well. So the main thing is to try it. And it's kind of like, I had a friend who wanted to start her healing journey, and so the first thing she tried was therapy. She couldn't stand her first therapist, so she was going to quit and give up. And we think about all that. I already tried that; it didn't work. Healing, 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 schmealing, whatever, right? And so I said, "Well, what do you do when you get a new pair of shoes and they don't fit or they're not comfortable?" She was like, "I get a new pair of shoes." And then she's like, "Oh, okay, I can get a new therapist." So she got another therapist. Didn't resonate with that one, but the third one she did, and had this great relationship with that person. So if you try something and it doesn't work, then try something else. And if that doesn't work, then try something else, right? There's all kinds of things that we can do to help ourselves in our healing journey. And really the first part is right here. Like, we want it, right? Wanting it and feeling worthy of feeling better, right? Wanting and feeling better. So awesome. The hour has already went by. um, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation and something sparked in your head that you're going to be chewing on for a while, and thinking about. I'm going to put a couple of these resources on our Facebook page, and thank you for the resources that were shared on here as well. And I just also want to remind folks that we are in a pandemic, and Indian country is being hit hard, whether it's in reservation or rural based communities, whether it's in urban communities, because of our intergenerational living, because of maybe our access or lack of access to information or masks or things like that. Our communities are being hit hard. So please, please, keep safe. Wash your hands and wear a mask when you're outside. Practice social distancing when you can. So protect yourselves and your families and our loved ones. So we're taking a weekend break from our power hours this weekend, and on Monday we will start week 24. If you want to scroll down on our Facebook page for the past 6 months, or the most easiest way is to go to our YouTube channel, Native Wellness Institute YouTube channel. And like I said, we have, I believe now, over 150 power hours that are on there. So you can take a look at that as well. I'll probably do another parenting power hour maybe in the next couple of weeks or so, and bring on a bunch of young parents. Our whole Native Wellness team is having babies all over the place. Sib just commented with some hearts. She's one of our new moms. And we'll just have a conversation on parenting again. So thank you all for tuning in. I hope you have an amazing weekend, and we will see you Monday on the next power hour, noon Pacific time. All right, take care.